All right, let's get into it. We are talking about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a philosopher whose life, honestly, was just as radical and chaotic as his ideas. I mean, this was a guy who basically declared war on the very society that was celebrating him. And his work? Well, it would go on to inspire both democracies and, yeah, dictatorships.
And this is the bombshell he dropped on the 18th century. Think about this statement for a second. With this one idea, Rousseau is arguing that private property wasn't some great leap forward for humanity. No, he says it was the original sin, the thing that led to all our problems: inequality, crime, war. It's really the heart of his entire battle with the world.
So how does somebody even get to a place where they're thinking like that? To really get Rousseau, you have to understand where he came from. And importantly, he wasn't a Frenchman. He was a proud citizen of a tiny little republic in a world that was run by kings.
And here he is, that signature that's mentioned, citizen of Geneva. That wasn't just him saying where he was from. It was a political statement. It was everything to him. You see, Geneva was a city-state, a Protestant republic, where the citizens were supposed to be in charge. This idea of freedom got baked into his brain and put him completely at odds with the big monarchies like France.
His early life was, well, a mess. Absolutely no stability. His mother died right after he was born, something he called the first of my misfortunes. Then, when he's just 10, his dad, a watchmaker with a bit of a temper, has to skip town. By 15, Rousseau is on his own, a runaway who ends up finding a patron and later a lover in an older woman, Madame de Warens. All this loss and chaos really created this fiercely independent but, you can imagine, deeply insecure person. And you can really see the two worlds that made him who he was right here. On one side, you have his roots, a craftsman's neighborhood in Geneva, humble. On the other, the super fancy French embassy in Venice, where he worked for a while. Seeing this huge gap between the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, it gave him this deep, lifelong suspicion of wealthy elites and corrupt governments. So, for years, all these feelings are just kind of bubbling under the surface. And then, one day, he's walking to visit his friend Diderot, who's in prison. And boom, it all just clicks into place. He has this massive revelation that will change everything.
This was the question. The Academy of Dijon was holding an essay contest, and this was the topic. Now, pretty much everyone was expected to say, of course, progress is great. But on that walk, Rousseau had his epiphany. He realized that all of our so-called progress, our art, our science, our fancy society, it hadn't made us better or happier, it had made us worse. It had corrupted us. So his answer was a loud, definitive no.
So how did he explain this? Well, he came up with this brilliant idea. He said we're all born with something called amour de soi. It's a natural, healthy self-love, a basic drive to survive. But then society gets its hooks in us, and it infects us with amour propre. And this is a toxic, comparative vanity. It's that need to constantly compare yourself to others, to get their approval, to envy what they have. It's basing your self-worth on what other people think. Sound familiar? For Rousseau, this was the root of all modern unhappiness.
And he laid this whole argument out in his famous Discourse on Inequality. The big idea is actually pretty simple, but it's devastating. The second that first person put a fence around a piece of land and said, "This is mine," that's when humanity went off the rails. That's what created rich and poor, masters and slaves, and a system where the wealthy basically trick the poor into thinking it's all perfectly normal.
But here's the thing about Rousseau. He wasn't just about tearing things down. He was a builder. If the old society was broken, fine. He was going to drop the blueprints for a new one, a better one that could actually make people free again.
And that blueprint was his masterpiece, The Social Contract. It is, without a doubt, one of the most important and, most controversial books on politics ever written. The goal was huge: figure out how to create a government that doesn't crush our freedom but actually creates it.
So how's it supposed to work? Let's break it down. First, everybody agrees to leave this so-called state of nature, which is basically chaos. Second, they all come together to form a society based on this one agreement, the social contract. Okay, now for step 3, and this is the really tricky part. Everyone has to submit their own personal will completely to something called the general will, what's best for the community as a whole. And this leads to the big paradox at the heart of his thinking. Step 4, you become truly free. How? Because by obeying laws that you, as part of the whole, helped create, you're really only obeying yourself.
Now, you can probably guess what happened next.
Ideas this radical, they were like a lit match in a powder keg. The book was a huge scandal, and the powers that be, both the church and the state, came down on him hard. Rousseau's life was about to get completely turned upside down.
And the attacks weren't just from kings and priests. They were personal. His own friends, his intellectual allies like Denis Diderot, turned on him with just pure venom. The guy who wrote a whole book attacking vanity was now being called the vainest man alive.
Things escalated fast. His books were literally burned in the streets of Paris, and even in his hometown of Geneva. Warrants were put out for his arrest. He had to run, becoming a fugitive, hunted across Europe. It got so bad that at one point, in a small Swiss village, the local churchgoers actually gathered outside his house and threw rocks at him until he fled. When you see a peaceful place like this, from his younger days, it's just such a sharp contrast to his later life, which was just filled with paranoia and constant running. He tried to find safety in Prussia, then in England with the philosopher David Hume, but he ended up getting into bitter fights everywhere he went. He just couldn't find any peace.
Rousseau died in 1778, but the fight over his legacy, that was just getting started. He left behind ideas so powerful and so full of contradictions that we are still arguing about him today.
So, which is it? Is he a hero or a villain? On the one hand, his ideas about the people being the true sovereign were a direct inspiration for the American and French revolutions, a total champion of freedom. But, on the other hand, critics point to that concept of the general will and say, wait a minute, that's a recipe for tyranny. I mean, who gets to decide what the general will is, and what happens if you disagree with it? It's a dangerous idea that has been used to justify some of history's most oppressive regimes. And in a final perfect twist of irony, the leaders of the French Revolution, who basically saw him as their guiding star, had his body moved here, to the Panthéon in Paris, a tomb for France's greatest heroes. And who did they bury him right next to? His arch-rival, the ultimate insider intellectual, Voltaire. A perfect ending for the ultimate outsider.
Rousseau's most famous line, the one everyone knows, is, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Now, he was talking about the chains of kings and aristocrats. But when you look around our world today, with all the social pressures, the economic divides, the political anger, you can't help but ask yourself, what chains are we still wearing? What are we still trying to break?